I got this composite function working, and now I am trying to figure out a way to consistently control the wave height, the wave amplitude. Okay, that's wrong. Without having to like fudge numbers, like to have it fully derivative, because everything else is working now. We have our depth. We have our depth attenuation, where our waves get smaller and smaller as they get closer to the shallower side, and bigger as they're on the deeper side. So it basically involves this function here. I've tried a few things. A coworker wasn't super helpful on this, so we're just gonna have to brute force it, just like we did with the other equation. So it may take days, but I'm thinking about it. Oh, let's see. All right, so we have to figure this out. We need to do it not just jamming in a value. Like we need to derive some relationship. So maybe we could calculate our coefficient in our at the same time as our octave. Oh, let's see. Let me think about that. I'll be right back, actually. 1 second. All right, I'm back. Dog pooped on the floor. I had to grab it real quick. Okay, so let's think about this. So there's probably some relationship to our octaves. Let's see. So let's just do float, accumulation, coefficient. We're going to start it at uh, 0.5 5, and then every time we go up an octave, will times equal itself. And then these would be multiplies. Okay, there we go. Okay, that's not really going to do it, I don't think. So let's think about this. Octave times current octave multiplier. Something like this, and then maybe we divide. That's a little too much. Hmm. Why? Why? Why doesn't this work? So it would be like its individual contribution to the overall scheme. So if we have 100 waves and we have 10 in an octave, and our octaves are zero point 0.5 each time, then our first 10, and let's say the steepness contribution is 1 baseline, our first 10 would contribute 10 total, our next 10 would contribute 5 total, 2.5, 1.25, let's say 20, right? 20, 10, 5, 2.5, 2.5. I mean, 1.25. So our total for 100 in that case would be 35, 37.5, 38.75 for 5 octaves. 20 over 100 is zero point 0.2. So, like, we've tried this, right? So, simulation coefficient plus equals wave Z times current octave multiplier. That's not too bad, but then what happens if I change it? So we'll change it to 50 waves per octave. Um, is that actually pretty consistent? What about 5? That might actually be pretty consistent. All right, now the real test. If I do 1,000 waves, 200 waves per octave. Hey, hey. That might do it. I think she's pooped again. Hang on. Gotta clean up after puppy mess. Did you poop somewhere? I think I smell it. I feel like I smell it. Yep. I tell you, you can't just steal my seat as soon as I get up, dude. You kidding me? Are you kidding me? Alright, move it. Move it, move it. Daddy, come on, move your fucking leg. I don't want to sit on you. Ah, no. Don't you give me that, you little salty boy. You little salty. You little salty turd. That might have actually done it. So, if it's do 100, so that they're all the same scale. And if I do 120, you have 5 octaves. Not sure why it needs to start at a higher value. Okay, so if I put this at a 10, what happens? So we create a value called flatten waves and assign it to accumulation coefficient here. All right, so what if we integrate the octave into the steepness calculation? No, I don't think that's good. 'Cause we're diminishing the effects of like the detailed surface normal here. Where's my fucking remote control? Too loud. Uh, Alright, guys, where did my channel changer go? Here it is. Alright. So that might do it. I'm a little surprised it works, to be completely honest. But it does appear to be doing what we wanted to do. So we need a new value. We'll call it like float wave flatness. We'll set this equal to wave flatness, and we'll set gf dot waveness equals 2. 0.5. All right, so now the test. We'll take it up to 100 and 200 and see if we keep a relatively consistent behavior, which we did. This is also doing 1,000 waves pretty quickly. About 500 and 200. Yeah, I think that does it. 550? 10 octaves? 500 and 100 for 5 octaves. We're going to try different octave scales. Looks good.
Discord that says it was an emergency shit. And I said, I know, I told them, smile. Yes. How did you know? Yes. And I said, because you sounded stressed AF, like you were about to shoot yourself when you left. He says, LMAO, division.
250? This only gives us 2 octaves with 250. Let's do 6 and 2. It's 3 octaves.
If I killed Eric, they do less things. They didn't defend themselves. Not right now.
About 30 octaves.
What? Wait, real? It's Santa Claus 2022. I don't know, it makes it less political, you know? Santa Claus is real. I can't say that.
Direction bounds X. So I'm wondering if it would be useful to separate the X and Y direction bounds. We could also get the direction from a flow map. This would be with like an island. Oh, whoops. No, this isn't correct. I was looking for this. Um, yeah, so definitely is an accumulation here.
He's literally forced to not yell at this point because he's killed too many of her other companions that like he just doesn't appreciate people at this point. And he's literally not gonna have anyone to travel with.
All right, so we also need to figure out if there's anything else that we should be applying. I'm gonna try something.
And the only ones for all their codes and companions. Because I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't. That was stupid. Listen, the key got keep it linear, all right? We're gonna kill Jap, we're gonna kill all the others just too. That's not how that works. We're gonna break you. You're okay with it? He's scared. He's hiding in the corner. He didn't attack.
That's nice. That's quite nice.
I'm so scared that I'm almost dead. Nah, bitch, you showed me that scene before you attacked. Holy. We're not being involved here. No, there's like 30 barrels in this room. I'm getting downstairs immediately. I said this whole place on fire on it. It's like, oh, this guy. I thought it was a regular. I was trying to be quick because I thought it was a regular barrel. I wasn't trying to take so much time. This fucking guy. Going downstairs, Billy. Hey, I'm doing stuff. You know the Gerstner. Nothing is perfect. Wait and feeling still. So big. Oh, I know. I am aware. I enjoy this exercise. Why I was off the bird of literally having you install a mod that AMP says you block.
I mean, I do think that this has pretty much solved the issue of like basically over accumulation of waves. Now I'm thinking I might want separate directional bounds for the x and y axis though. So direction bounds x, y, x, x, y, y. Oops. Yeah, not like this, and not like this. This is actually y. Y, direction, bounds, dot, no, x, dot, x, direction, bounds, y, dot, y, and this is actually x. Okay.
You want to save the artist? Holy shit.
Let's just bias the waves in a specific direction.
You did tell us that we had all this thing.
All right.
Phase at the end.
I think that's pretty close. So let's clean it up.
Yeah, but it won't do damage to us because you're an individual. Yeah. See? No damage. Yeah, and still no damage. Why is it? Yeah, so reckless powers your entire turn. So any fact that you can alpha reckless can be a reaction, right? So like you may be able to hit the target without reckless effect. All reckless does is give you a
And
damage.
if we wanted to say, like, let's say,
And then you can because if you reckless attack, they also give the enemies advantage against you. So sometimes they need
so let's say we took this gradient, and we divided it by 2.
no, that's not good.
Then we've, like, basically extended our shoreline. And this is kind of like your appearance at the ocean front, right? Because on a real, like, on a real planet, the depth range is not going to be 1 very often. That would be the deepest it can get. So, like this, the waves here, or actually, even if we do this, this would be like your waves in the open ocean, like as deep as you can possibly get. And also, I think we're too fast.
There's some yellow guys up here. You too?
That's a little bit more realistic, I think. This would be like your waves in the deepest ocean, and then this would be what you would see closer to like the shoreline. To be fair, though, we're not gonna have probably the ability to control our direction very effectively. So it'd be more like this. But so that we can just see the gradient, it's easier to work with it like this for the moment. So this is pretty close. I think next we'll have to convert this to basically make a triplanar mapping version of it. And we may not be able to use our triplanar mapping. I'm gonna have to think about that. We may have to do like a instead of 3 planes, like 6 planes, because we need depth calculations, and the depth calculations, like, you can't just project the waves from one side of the ocean to the other side. I'll have to look at how I did the other one because I had triplanar in my Ocean 3, and it was also doing depth based calculations. So I have to see how I did that one.
She became my friend and my teacher, and then
It looks good though. Um, all right. I mean, we could make a tsunami with it if we wanted to, but really, it's just the challenge here is integrating a depth function into the Gerstner wave function, like a fractal Gerstner wave. And it's actually took me a really long time to land on the correct math to make that happen. Because, a lot of things are in the equation are dependent upon the frequency, and in order for it to be realistic, as you get shallower, your waves get slower and their frequency increases. So I'm trying to replicate that in game form. And right now, for instance, we're just faking the depth with this. So if I plug this in to color, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So this is our depth value, right? And it's normalized, but we have this generated on our mesh as well. Um, so you can see as we get shallower, as we get deeper, we have bigger, uh, we have bigger, like more tumultuous waves, which would be like deep ocean waves, right? And then as we get closer to zero depth, which would be like the shoreline, your waves get closer together and shallower. And you need that because if you have waves this size next to your beach, you'll have a bunch of the land showing through the waves when they dip down real low. We don't want that. So this is just my attempt to kind of replicate that kind of natural wave attenuation based on depth. And it's getting pretty close now, I think. Um, so basically, yes, a big dark mark. Yes, it's the depth. So it's this is all that's probably the normals not being calculated 100% correctly, so we'll have to look into that. You're talking about like these dark segments when it dips down really low. I'm probably not scaling the normals correctly actually, which would be we are let me see if I even need this. Hang on. Yeah, I think we do. I think it would also look better in like an actual scene with more proper lighting and such. But yeah, so there's a lot to consider. Basically, for a long, long time, I was trying to get it working by just changing this calculation here. And the breakthrough was realizing that I needed to create a second K value with the original wavelength, not the adjusted wavelength. And I needed to calculate my C value, which is our time coefficient, based on our original wavelength divided by our adjusted K value. And when I did this, everything fell into place and it started to become controllable because before it was like um, I don't know how to put it. It was like accumulating frequency. So like over time, the entire ocean would get a higher and higher frequency, so you would get more and more waves till the point it looked like ridiculous. And it was because that time scale was not being normalized correctly. But now it's like I'll always have on the deepest part, I'll always have some proportion of my scale in waves. So like in this case, if we take a look, I have one scale divisor. So that means at any given time in the very deepest part, we'll only be able to represent one entire wave at a time. Now, this is a composite of a bunch of waves, so you still get more than one wave. But if I was only using one wave, you would only be able to have one wave with this scale out here. And then our min depth frequency is 1, which means that over here on the small side, on the shallow side, we would have 10 waves across, or 10 waves this way. Now, it doesn't in practice work out that way because it's actually a warp over the distance. So you can't have 10 waves because you would only have that at the very, very far left edge here. So it's some combination of that. But the main point is we have a consistent number of smaller waves and a consistent number of bigger waves, and it's consistent across the entire spectrum. It's not accumulating waves over time as the time factor is like failing to properly scale the phase of the waves. And that was kind of the breakthrough that led to this. This is, and I have like this that I've used before on my planet, but this is what I was talking about where like this is the one that can accumulate too many waves. Also, I jacked it up somehow. Um, but like the amplitude's too high, so it doesn't look right. But I'm gonna be redoing this shader using this new modified formula. Um, and rather than going for like the three-dimensional waves, I'm gonna do the like three-dimensional spherical waves. I'm gonna either do triplanar or hexaplanar mapping to do it. I'm not sure if I have to do hexaplanar or not. Um, I may need it. I may not. The issue with triplanar is I don't think I can do the waves on just one side and directly translate that to the other side because it has to take the depth of each vertex into account. So it's more likely I would have to do waves for each direction of a cube, right? And then map them onto the sphere that way. But if I do that, I can use this formula, which is two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional, like the one that we just looked at, and kind of just use triplanar mapping to kind of try and achieve this goal, which is like you want realistic coastlines. Because if you just had this, like here, I can let's do this. If I just set this to one, if you just have this, right, it will look fine when you're in the deep ocean. But if you're on a shoreline, this is not going to look right because your waves are going in all directions. They're not bending towards the shoreline, and they're also too deep. So you're going to get things like we can actually see out here because the amplitude's too high. What I'm talking about with that, like you're going under, your waves are going under the land, and you don't want that. So that's kind of like the reason why we have the ability to modulate the waves and the frequencies of the waves based on the depth. So let's see here. Let's grab this and reformat it. And then the other problem I was having is that it's hard to figure out the way to control the because this is a bunch of different waves added together, and it's hard to stop them from looping over on themselves. So if I remove this part, this is what happens if I don't. And that's what we just came up with was this right here, this part of it. And if we have this, then obviously the more waves we have, the more potential we have for forming loops, which a few loops are not bad because we can use the loops to identify the crests of breaking waves, which is why I colored the underside white and the top side blue so that we could easily see that. But like too many loops or too big of loops obviously doesn't look right. So we have this accumulation coefficient that is basically allowing us to scale the number of waves we have and the number of waves in each octave and maintain like a consistent mapping without forming loops. So like I just turn it up to 1,000 waves with 100, turn it down to 100 with 10, and we have like a consistent behavior between the two. And then the other one is this wave flatness value, which we added in as a part of that, which allows us to basically increase the choppiness, and then we can get some loops, right? Because a few of these aren't bad. It lets us have like white caps. We just don't want we just don't want them all over the place. I put wave flatness at like 0.1. It makes everything choppier. Put it on 1, and it looks like this. But I do think that I'm reaching a stopping point here. Hang on, I wanted to format everything and get it cleaned up. At some point, I'm going to put this up on GitHub and post the code for it, but it's not ready yet. 1.5. Format it correctly. 2575.51. Let's do 0.75, 1.25 as our default there. Okay. It triggers me when the text isn't formatted properly and they don't allow you to use tab in this window, and I don't want to space everything out manually by hand. No, a stopping point for this stream. The ocean system is not done yet. Wait, hang on. Let me see your question. No foam yet at the shore on top of waves. So we can do shoreline foam. I have the mask for that. I just don't have a good texture for it yet. So like I can add like it will not be difficult to add foam around objects in the it will not be hard to add foam around objects that are intersecting with the water because I already have the like material function for that. The foam on the peaks of waves, on the other hand, is really challenging, and that's what I'm going to look at probably pretty soon. I saw in a paper they were talking about taking the Jacobian matrix of the waveform, and you can use that to determine the wave peak foam. The problem with that is I have no idea what the fuck a Jacobian matrix is, so I have to figure that out. so, um, so I'm sure that there's a way using our existing math function to take some form of a derivative of that function and figure out the wave crests, but I haven't been able to successfully do that yet. The best I've been able to do is to basically color the underside of this white and then just let the loops form naturally. If I say change our sharpness again here to like a 0.1, and then you can sort of get like breaking crests on waves, right? Because what's actually happening is a loop is occurring, but that's not really ideal because we're relying on it to like go out of bounds to get this effect. Um, and we would much rather be able to like have a controllable function that allows us to just mask out the tops of the waves without having to force them to go into loops, right? So, because I would still like to be able to have like crests on these waves without relying on the actual geometry inverting um, on our mesh, ideally. And then there's another thing that I want to look at that was really cool, um, which is view projected mesh. So you can't use collision with it. It's a concept. You can't use collision, but like the idea is, let me get up paint. The idea is we can make our camera. Let's say this is our, oops. Let's say this is our camera, and this is our view for us, or our view cone, right? So the idea is we can create a plane, a highly subdivided plane, and put it a, and lock it to our camera such that in our view, oops, in our view, that plane, and it would be highly subdivided. We're not going to highly subdivide it because that's too much work in paint, but um, would span our entire view, right? Just a mesh plane that spans the entire view over the camera. So this is in front of anything that we would be looking at. Um, and then what we can do is we can do a ray sphere intersection for our planet ocean, or you can do a plane intersection as well. And we can project through from the camera through each vertex a ray. And let's say we're only going to pay attention to the ones that intersect this sphere, right? And then what we can do is for each vertex that we project this ray and it intersects the sphere, we can displace that vertex by the amount it takes to put it on the sphere. And we can do this for every vertex in this plane, right? And what that does for us, and then you have to figure out a way to like basically either cull or hide these vertexes, or you could even just have all of these vertex move to the last point that intersected the sphere or the object that you're trying to project onto. But what that does is it gives us a constant mesh resolution for this mesh that you can use for things like water. And as you move the camera around, your ray sphere intersection changes, so all the projections of all these points change, and then you do your math on the end result projected point world position from that point. And let me see, I can Yes, yes, exactly. I agree. I'm at a point of complexity that faking it like that would be sad. Just relying on the geometry inverting while it's good for being able to just look at it and like, oh, okay, this is sort of what the crest would be. I don't really want to do it like that. I've already fucking learned all this other math. I can figure out the Jacobian matrix or whatever I have to do to make that happen. It's just like it's just another derivative that we have to figure out. And that's not the end of the world. But let me see if I can find screen space projected mesh grid. I found a video of a guy who managed to do this in Unreal, and it was actually a really good video. Like it had the full details. Okay, yeah, perfect. Here we go. So ideally, we want a uniform resolution in screen space instead of in the 3D world. And since we don't care about collision, because one of the primary weaknesses of this is you can't get collision on it because it's all based on world position offsets. So we basically put a grid in screen space coordinates and project that onto, in this case, a plane, but in our case, we would be doing a sphere intersection. And you can see the results of that is that if we look at this, even though this mesh, it's like it hurts my brain almost to see this because it looks like the mesh is like you're facing it straight, but this mesh is actually aligned with the ground plane here. And the reason it's uniform is because it's generated in screen space and then projected to the positions to match the ground plane, and that's why it's intersecting with these things at the ground plane. But that's something that I'm interested in exploring for the water, because if I can do this, then I don't have to. You cannot have collision because you're doing it all with world position offset. So like you're basically generating a really high density quad that you're locking in position in front of the camera, and then for each vertex in the quad, you're projecting that away from the camera along the ray from the camera to that point to whatever point you need that to be in world space, right? So if we go back to this, see, like this is what we got right now. Um, but you don't need collision with water because you just go in the water, like you fall through the surface of it. So this, on the other hand, is the screen space projected idea, which like it still gets the Gerstner wave modification, so you still get some variance, but the density at each point in the screen is uniform, even when it's far away or up close, because it's all coming from um, like a screen space projected quad, basically. And there was a video I saw. Yeah, here we go. This is what it was talking about. A simulated ray can never cross the plane. This is what I was talking about, where you have to deal with infinity, like because if you going back to paint, if you miss the sphere, if we don't detect a hit, we have to handle that too, and you shouldn't be able to see this vertex anymore. It needs to basically fold behind everything. So it'd be like this vertex would be like way back here, somewhere where it doesn't interfere with the effect, right? Um, I'm gonna at least try making it like this, even though I sort of have it working with mesh generation. Like right now, my mesh is generating two quads or two meshes per quad tree node, ocean mesh and a land mesh. Um, but yeah, if we, I'm interested in attempting that, attempting to use that screen space mesh projection idea because I think it's really cool. And I think there was, hang on, let me see if I can find it on YouTube. It's screen space mesh projection. Maybe. Yeah, it was this one. This is actually a freaking awesome video because it had all the material that I
Turn your
used
ideas into videos.
in a really
Go to
short video
artlist.io
to
and
do
get
this and map
everything
it
you
to
need
a
all.
plane.
That plane is unwrapped like so, I'm first going to subtract 0.5 to the texture coordinates
So he
to
shows
have
how
0,
to
0b on
make
the
the material
center,
to basically
then mask
convert.
0.5 plane and have great details up close.
Hang on, let me
A
find it.
really efficient material.
So he
To
makes like a
screen
high
space,
density
if that
mesh.
makes sense. So, assuming that plane
So like he's got this high density mesh, right, and that world position will be somewhere slightly in front of the camera. But he goes through all the math in here to convert those world positions uh, of each vertex projected along the camera vector to the ground plane. We can't exactly use that, but in some of our code for the atmosphere shader, so in some of the code for the atmosphere shader, we do a bunch of sphere traces. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. He does the infinite plane projection here, and he does it with a virtual plane, and I forget where it was. But either way, you end up basically the idea is you end up with a projected world position. So instead of being in a material like this and working with world position, you would have this big block of code over here that projects your screen space position to a world position, and then you would work with that world position in all your equations instead of the absolute world position. And instead of projecting it to a virtual plane like he did, we would be projecting it to a sphere trace, which would be set to whatever the radius of our sea level is and centered at our planet center, right? So then we're basically, um, I'm trying to think of a good, it's like if you had, if you could project shrink wrap in front of you that grew infinitely so that it always looked like it was the same scale and it would wrap a sphere, kind of. And then you do your operations on that shrink wrap after you've projected it. So I'm interested in chasing that. Um, that'll probably be sometime later in the week. Try to just get like a basic demo of just doing that working. But as for now, I need to go take care of a couple things around the house, so I'm gonna call it here. But yeah, later, dude.